welcome to TheAIbumMan, and today we're going to be taking a look at Sonic Highways by the Foo Fighters, the highly anticipated release by one of the biggest rock bands on the planet currently. Dave Grohl's crew have steadily been cementing themselves as one of rock music's premier acts, with massive arena tours, stadium-filling performances, chart positions, documentaries of Sound City and the series accompanying Sonic Highways, all while creating this brand of more mainstream rock that, well, metal fans aren't afraid to listen to, and that isn't stigmatised in sort of a Nickelback way. I mean, it's okay to sort of have a Slayer t-shirt and a leather jacket on and also say that you think that Colour and Shape's a great album. It's a sort of a guilty pleasure that's kind of alright, because Dave Grohl, he wears his influences on his sleeves and comes across as a pretty damn cool guy, as well as the respect he gets for being the freaking drummer from Nirvana. But on Sonic Highways, I feel that maybe the tide is slightly changing. While Wasting Light was lauded by fans, critics, even some naysayers, just had to admit how impressive it was. The ultra-melodic, garage rock style music with Pat Smear, Nirvana's guitars back in the fold. It was just a really great album. Now, I mean, I originally did say I didn't like it at first. You look back at some of my older videos. I was quite scathing towards the album, but it's one of those, over time, I've really come to appreciate it. And while Echo Silence Patience Grace is still my favourite Foo Fighters album, I know a lot of Foo fans aren't too big on that album, but to me, it's just absolutely peerless because of the use of dynamics, the light and shade, and some of the best crescendos I've heard in rock music this side of bands like Anathema and Solstice Year. But Sonic Highways, it's received a rather more muted response on Metacritic, certainly receiving only like a 67, I think, maybe, and general reviews overall on YouTube as well have been, it's alright, but it's not great. And as much as I would love to say this is my album of the year for 2014, it would be far from the truth. Instead, what we have here is one of the band's weaker efforts, and as much as I don't like to conform with mainstream opinion, when I have to, I have to. So let's go back, let's go track by track and see why this album fails to deliver on its hype, in my eyes and the eyes of many. The opening track, the first single I heard from this album, was Something From Nothing, and immediately I loved the opening part, the gentle pick guitar adding slide guitar, and seemingly going for a Pretender-like crescendo. It's like, oh my god, yes, this is going to be the follow-up to the Pretender I've been wanting. Awesome, and then it instead goes to this really funky part that has a riff that strongly reminds me of a very classic riff. In fact, when I was listening to it the first time, I was like, I'm sure I know that. I'm sure I've heard that riff somewhere. So I picked up my guitar, and instantly I could play it, realising that it's the same rhythm and the same chords as Holy Diver by Dio, the supreme metal classic by my favourite vocalist and honestly one of my all-time just favourite artists in music. And I found that disappointing, and certainly looking online afterwards, I'm hardly the only person to notice this striking resemblance. And well, on one hand I can say, oh, it's nice that Dave Grohl keeping Dio alive, taking inspiration, it's a nice tribute. On the other hand, I do believe there's far better ways of going about it than plagiarising one of his best riffs. Instead, if you want to honour him, do something in style, something that sounds like it could have been a Dio song if he'd still been alive today, instead of taking a riff and, well, passing it off as you own. Now, I haven't watched a documentary series, so maybe it's clarified in that. I really need to watch that. I've heard that's meant to be pretty good, better than the album, actually. But the problem is, you know, even if it's justified and, you know, he acknowledges Dio and all of that, I still find the resemblance to that riff so uncanny that I honestly find it detracts from the immersion of the song. I mean, okay, the track, aside from that, it does build to a quite satisfactory finale with Grohl's trademark screams, but overall I just came away a bit underwhelmed. I didn't really see this as that special a track, and it certainly made me wary going into this album, and certainly to lower my expectations. Then when I had The Feast and the Famine, which is the second track I had from the album, unsurprisingly, well, just the second track seemed to be released. I seem to release the singles kind of in order a bit with this one. Well, probably because of the documentary series and whatever. And this features a couple members of the punk band Scream. Now, I'm no big punk fan. I like some British punk and the odd bit of American, but I don't really know the punk scene very well at all, so I can't say I know who Scream are. But I really like this track on the album. I think Grohl does a great job of channeling his inner punk self into a raw, in-your-face, brutally upfront rock song with a catchy punk rock, yet still Foo Fighters chorus. I mean, saying that it's nothing special or new for the band, it's still the same type of chunky chord-driven, addictive rock music we've come to love from them, but I think that extra bit of punk makes it that bit more interesting. I mean, arguably, White Limo does a better job of that whole heavier Foo Fighters thing, but I like this. I mean, Foo Fighters music has always had a punk influence, and certainly in the earlier albums you can definitely hear that, and I think it's a nice throwback to that earlier sounds and Grohl's love of punk, so I think it works pretty well for Feast and Famine, actually. Congregation, recorded in Nashville, Tennessee, and featuring Zac Brown, that kind of sent alarm bells ringing, and it was like, oh god, is Grohl going country? Is this going to be Grohl acting like Taylor Swift? No, luckily it isn't. This isn't. It really isn't a country song. I mean, there's a country vibe to it, as you kind of expect, but instead, really, it's just pulled back a little, perhaps a bit mellower, but it still has a signature foot-stomping Foo sound to it. It doesn't mean it really impresses me all that much. I mean, it feels quite formulaic, like going down a road you've been down 100 times before. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing to dislike or hate about it, but it's hardly going to make me think twice. The song I was definitely most excited for had to be What Did I Do / God Is My Witness, featuring blues up-and-comer Gary Clark Jr. on guitar. And I was particularly looking forward to seeing it because I really like Gary Clark Jr. as a guitarist. He's a very interesting, supremely talented guitarist, though I would argue maybe not a wonderful songwriter. When it comes to Black and Blue, I know critics seem to like that album a lot. I thought it was a very mixed bag, containing some of the best blues over the last decade and also some utter crap. Still, here we don't really get to see his virtuoso playing in action that much. I'd be hard-pressed to tell you that the guitarist here was someone of Gary Clark Jr.'s caliber if it wasn't for the fact it was written down on the booklet or Wikipedia page. This song is definitely a song of two halves. I mean, it sort of gives that away in the title, but it really is in the sense of quality. What Did I Do is a mediocre, middle-of-the-road Foo song, whereas God Is My Witness, this focuses more on the blues side, has a solo from Gary Clark, an infectious roaring chorus, a mellow organ. They should have just taken out What Did I Do? No one needs that big. Just extend God Is My Witness, give it a freaking epic guitar solo, you could have some jawling going on, right? It could be sweet if they just focused on God Is My Witness, because that's a really good song. What Did I Do feels a little superfluous, honestly. Outside is Joe Walsh of the Eagles, so you're going to expect this to sound a bit like an AOR song, and it does. It sounds a bit like sort of an a forgettable AOR B-side that you put maybe as a filler track on Hotel California or Foreigners 4 or Journey's Escape, but not a track you'd really think much of. This is definitely one of the weakest tracks on the album. This does absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't mind AOR. I mean, I'm no big AOR fan, but AOR's alright from time to time. Can be a bit of fun. Again, this treads the same old ground. They may have been far from home in each city, but it still feels like very familiar territory. You see, the thing was, Wasting Light felt like a modern, interesting, fresh approach to commercial rock and the Foo's sounds. It really took that garage vibe, and I think it did very well, combining sort of heavier sounds, and again, still keeping those trademark dynamics that the Foos are so good at. But here, the songs just feel, I would say, maybe a lot more watered down, a lot, maybe more so you could argue, pandering to a lowest common denominator of rock fans, possibly. More very much to sort of mainstream rock radio. This just feels like it looks so retrospectively with outside of what worked for the band before and also what's worked for the Eagles, and it does neither of them particularly well. Though In the Clear is actually kind of a cool song, because mainly because of the jazz ensemble that backs the track. If it wasn't for that, it wouldn't be very good. especially if it's uninspiring lyricism and rather tired sounding formulaic chunky chords. Yeah, you know what? I am running out of things to say on this album because, I mean, it's not that I'm lacking adjectives, it's more that this album is just lacking substance. And this track is as middle of the road as it gets, aside from the jazz band, which is freaking cool. I really like the jazz influence here, that big brassy band behind it, harkens back to like classic sort of Muscle Shoals backing, like Albert King and cool stuff like that. So it's alright, yeah. Though Subterranean, this is certainly no Subterranean Homesick Blues by Bob Dylan or Subterranean Homesick Alien by Radiohead. This is an acoustic ballad on the album, and something that, well, Grohl has done masterfully in the past, as demonstrated on Echo Science Patience Grace. Oh my god, you know, Long Road to Ruin, a couple other songs as well. He's very, very good at doing this type of thing. And again, this is just average. Why is it average, you're going to ask me? Well, because it fails to deliver on either an emotional level, which a ballad could deliver on, and that works very well, personally something I prefer, or a ballad can work on an anthemic level, go for that power ballad type thing. Instead, this sort of straddles the line, doing neither well, and is my least favourite track on the album. Lastly, I Am the River is a finale that does somewhat better. This is a soaring finale to the album, that while it's nowhere near the upper echelon of Foo Fighters crescendos or anthems, it's something I can't help but enjoy, with Tony Visconti arranging the strings, Grohl shouting, "Is this what you want? Is that what you really want?" I mean, this pales in comparison to Walk from Wasting Light, but it's still effective and evocative to a degree. Really, Mr. Grohl, in attempting to incorporate America's entire rich musical heritage into one album, he should have gone all out with it, or not at all. Instead, he doesn't really take that much influence from the places that he goes to, or the musicians he met on this journey, and I'd be hard-pressed to tell you, if I wasn't aware from reading about it, that there were guests, or I wouldn't know the premise behind it, just listening to this album blind, effectively. Because really, the traditional music he's looking at, it's only really subtly hinted on across the album. Instead, the Foo's formula trumps the influence. They've created a commercial-sounding rock album, lacking depth and substance, that always made the Foo Fighters a kind of cool band, that made them acceptable, made them stand out. Here, though, they're just another rock band, but then again, it's still the Foo Fighters, and I enjoy the Foo Fighters, so it's not a bad album. I would recommend checking this out if you like a lot of mainstream rock music, a lot of stuff you find on rock radio, or if you're a hardcore Foo Fighters fan, check it out. If you're just getting into the Foos or something, then go to Colour and Shape, Echo Science Patience Grace, Wasting Light would be my main suggestions, and leave this till you know the band a bit better. 6.75 out of 10. It's still a good album, it's still a solid release, but it certainly doesn't expand the Foo's formula, and it's definitely one of the weaker albums in their catalogue. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching, comment, subscribe, and as usual, long live rock and roll.